Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Hope all of you are having a good day so far, or this morning, I should say. For homework tonight, you have the Chapter 11, Section 1 Key Terms assignment. All right, assignment 11.1a. All right, that is in Schoology. Make sure you get that done and completed by Thursday, 3 p.m. All right, that's when it is due. All right, the only thing you had for homework last night was to get the notes downloaded, which I would ask that you take them out. As we are going to start Chapter 11, all right, the Civil Rights Movement. All right, and the Civil Rights Movement, which went from 1945 to 1975, is highlighted kind of by this picture here of Martin Luther King Jr., right, giving his famous I Have a Dream speech at the Washington Mall. You can see the Washington Monument in the background there, and this image is iconic for this time period. All right, you have thousands of people gathering here, all right, to hear what Martin Luther King Jr. has to say on African Americans and all races and genders kind of achieving social equality, and migrant farm workers within the United States. Okay, and if you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, you probably have seen this image before. I'm sure most of you have seen this image before, and we're going to build up to this important event in American history in this chapter. All right, and how Martin Luther's dream, all right, is to see people of all countries, races, and religions living together in harmony. All right, and this is one of his legacies here, one of the events that he kind of has left behind. So starting off section 1, we're going to talk about the beginnings of the Civil Rights Movement, which really began after World War I. Right? If you think back to what we started this year off with the Civil War, and African Americans made important gains after the Civil War, but when Reconstruction ended, most of those gains, those Civil War amendments, 13, 14, and 15, 14, 15, and 16, all right, they still were part of our society, part of our government, enforced by our government, but these gains are kind of lost, and it's going to get kind of pushed aside by years and years of inequality and injustice. And if you don't know who's in this picture here, then you probably live under a rock and don't watch baseball. This is Jackie Robinson, all right, who wasn't just the first African American player to play, baseball. He was the first African American to break the color barrier in sports, and he was, not just an average baseball player. He was a great baseball player, and the way he carried himself in the game, the way he dealt with the injustices and the equality that he faced on a regular basis, will kind of serve as a model for a lot of African Americans during this movement after World War II. And we're going to start off this section talking about the racial barriers that existed in all parts of the country. However, they took different forms in the North and in the South. If you think about, the gains and difficulties African Americans experienced after the Civil War, a lot of African Americans, they gained the freedom from slavery, but a lot of them faced extreme poverty, little access to education, and laws that enforced segregation specifically in the South. And as you've learned, there was a court case out there, Plessy v. Ferguson, which reinforced segregation, in which the court ruled that segregation was legal as long as separate but equal, and facilities were provided for both races, when in fact a lot of schools and facilities for African Americans were rarely equal, and if ever equal in terms of their cleanliness and qualities, for a lot of white Southerners. And there was a struggle for equality that's going to pick up after World War II, where you have African Americans, that played a major role in World War II, and they come back home and they realize how many injustices are still going on. And the racial barriers were different in the North compared to the South. Right? In the North, generally, there was no official segregation law. African Americans could still vote. They had legal access to jobs and colleges, but still African Americans and whites rarely mixed. In the North, there were like white neighborhoods and African American neighborhoods. They tended to live, in different communities, and as a result, their children usually attended different schools. So school districts, the demographic of a school district was different because very rarely did African Americans and whites mix in the North. Right, so they lived in separate communities. They did face prejudice in hiring and in housing. Many qualified African Americans could not get high-paying jobs. Homeowners in white neighborhoods would oftentimes refuse to sell their homes to African Americans, and other groups such as Jews or immigrants frequently faced very similar forms of discrimination. And this is all, right after World War II. Okay, in the South, what the African Americans faced was a little different. Segregation was the way of life. It was normal, for there to be a park for whites only, a park for African Americans only, or a bathroom for whites, a bathroom for African Americans, a water fountain for whites, a water fountain for African Americans. But by the early 1900s, segregation was firmly in place in all southern states, and the so-called Jim Crow laws enforced separation of races in schools and hospitals, on public transportation, in movie theaters, in restaurants. All right, there were some restaurants that would refuse to take African Americans as customers. And as I said, drinking fountains were also, for whites only, or they would say colored only. And the court case that justified these Jim Crow laws in the South was the Plessy v. Ferguson case in 1896, which I said earlier, ruled that segregation is legal as long as it's separate but equal. And when we meet in the conference on Thursday, we'll talk more about how African Americans were rarely, if ever, equally treated in the South in terms of their facilities and privileges compared to a lot of white Southerners. And that's really where the civil rights movement will kick off and then expand throughout the entire country. All right, so a short video today. If you want to get started on the key terms, you can after that. And we will pick up with separate but unequal. Thursday. All right, sorry about that delay. Just got caught up. My son's getting into something. All right. Hope all of you have a great day, and I will speak to you guys on Thursday. Enjoy your activity day tomorrow. Bye.